All right, welcome everyone. It is 12:02 and we'll get started with this month's Alberta SCILS webinar, Barriers to Funding a Healthy Bladder. Alberta SCILS is a monthly webinar series supported by Praxis Spinal Cord Institute and led by health providers from Alberta Health Services and Spinal Cord Injury Alberta, including people with lived experience. This webinar is co-designed by lived experience experts and clinical experts so that both perspectives are shared during Alberta SCILS. This webinar is designed for people living with spinal cord injury, their family members, and service providers involved in their lives. We anticipate Alberta SCILS will improve audience knowledge and empowerment through creating a sense of community, changing perceptions on disability, and improving social connectedness. Just remind everyone that the Rehabilitation Advice Line is a telephone advice line supported by HealthLink, and it provides wayfinding and self-management service to Albertans with physical conditions relating to an existing musculoskeletal or neurological condition or post-COVID-19 recovery needs. And the phone number is there on your screen. Just a reminder that the information contained in these webinars and related materials is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your medical practitioners for more information and to see what's right for you. And if you didn't already know, the webinar is being recorded and it's going to be made publicly accessible after we are done here today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping rules so you can read it on the screen, but if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, muting your microphone until and unless you are speaking, there'll be opportunity for discussion on the second half of our webinar. At that point, invite you to unmute your microphones and participate in the discussion. I'm really happy today to introduce our first speaker, Jocelyn Brady. Jocelyn is going to walk us through the beginning of this webinar, followed by Rebecca Charbonneau and Doctors Rebecca Charbonneau and Dr. Alberto Loyola Sanchez, or Beto Sanchez, will be speaking shortly. And without further ado, Jocelyn, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sean. So that was a great introduction. I think we can head on over to the next slide here. So I would like to start with a few acknowledgements of the stakeholders who made this work possible. And first, our team would like to thank all the folks across Alberta who participated in this study and shared their experiences with us. I would also like to thank Alberta SCILS for hosting this webinar and inviting our team to share our project. And finally, this work would not have been possible without funding from the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute. We can go to the next. Perfect. So to give a little bit of background about our team, we are a provincial research team that includes people with SCI, community organizations, including Spinal Cord Injury Alberta and Wheels of Change, clinicians in Edmonton and Calgary, and researchers. And this study was developed in response to calls from people with lived experience for more attention to be paid to bladder health concerns in the community. And our team's goal is ultimately to improve UTI care and bladder health for people with SCI across the province. So our objective was to gain an in-depth understanding of bladder management in the community, and specifically how UTIs are detected and managed to ultimately improve bladder health for Albertans with SCI. And to do this, we conducted one-on-one interviews with 19 people with SCI in the community and disseminated a survey that was completed by 39 people. And the majority of people we interviewed used in and out catheters. Similarly, 59% of our survey respondents used in and out catheters. And 32% of our interview participants and 42% of our survey participants reported their sex as female. I will note before we continue that there are experiences from the interviews and surveys that aren't highlighted to the same extent today due to time limitations. And some of these experiences include those of people who use indwelling catheters or who void independently. However, we have collected information from these groups and they are represented in our larger work. So moving on here, this is the thematic visual that our team has created to represent some of the main concepts that came through in our interviews with people. There are 6 major themes, which include bladder management and UTI prevention, peers with lived experience, healthcare providers and services, financial barriers, unrepresentative priorities, and inaccessibility of services and spaces. So these 6 major themes contribute to 2 main takeaways that are listed at the top and bottom of this slide, which include that bladder is central to daily life of our participants, and bladder management represents a health inequity among our participants. And this visual represents an extensive amount of information and quotes from people who participated. So to keep our discussion within an hour today, I will be focusing on 3 of the major themes, and those include bladder management and UTI prevention, unrepresentative priorities, and the third is financial barriers. So moving into more of the results from our interviews, although this statement here on the slide that says people with SCI prioritize the maintenance of good bladder health and integrity to prevent UTIs and support bladder control in their daily lives. Although this may seem obvious or a little redundant, it was an important finding for us in this study. And that's because our project was initially developed to understand treatment and health-seeking behaviors during active infections, i.e. UTIs. So to hear from most people that their priority was maintaining their bladder health and preventing UTIs rather than prioritizing the treatment of UTIs once they had an infection, it kind of affected how we understood our assumptions of where bladder priorities were for community members. And part of the reason why people prioritize bladder maintenance and UTI prevention had to do with the devastating impacts of UTIs that they described to their physical, emotional, financial, and social well-being. Likewise, maintaining bladder health supported participants' sense of security and control on a daily basis. And being in control meant that participants who catheterized could participate in their daily routines in a way that best suited them. But just as these 2 quotes on the slide describe, being in control did not necessarily mean that people's bladder routines were not onerous or time-consuming. It just meant that they could go through their day in a way that was acceptable to them. And the alternative was when they had an active UTI, their entire lives stopped in some cases because their bladder kind of controlled their day-to-day life. So considering the importance of maintaining bladder health and preventing UTIs, we heard from many participants about a variety of barriers that they navigate to ensuring good bladder health. These barriers include financial constraints, which I will discuss on the next slide, and unrepresentative priorities between stakeholders in government and healthcare compared to people with lived experience. So government-funded services were described by some participants to be ineffective in meeting people's bladder needs. And the limited supply of catheters and other bladder products, as well as the presumed expectation that people reuse catheters, was an indication to participants that their health may not be a priority. And by not funding an adequate supply of catheters for everyone, and this doesn't even include single-use or hydrophilic catheters, governmental priorities were perceived by some people to be downstream treatment of UTIs rather than supporting the upstream prevention and maintenance of bladder health. Likewise, there was differential coverage based on the circumstances of someone's injury, as described in the quote here on the slide. And this quote highlights a systemic barrier in how injuries are qualified or prioritized in terms of the different amounts of funding that people have access to. And as mentioned in the quote on the last slide, unless someone is injured at work, it costs money to pee. This financial burden forced some participants to make difficult decisions between reusing catheters and potentially increasing the risk of getting a UTI, how they perceived it, or refusing to reuse supplies and having to buy more catheters. That is in excess of the number that are covered by funded services, which is described in the quote here. And the cost of catheters and differential coverage, depending on the circumstances of someone's injury, creates inequities in access to these indispensable bladder supplies. And these costs increase when people pee more frequently, which typically was described because either they were drinking more fluids or because they were experiencing incontinence. Therefore, some people would restrict their fluid intake so that they would reduce the number of catheters they used in a day to try and save money. Or during UTIs and active infections, catheter usage would increase for many participants because many people describe experiencing incontinence, which increased the financial burden of bladder supplies during those times. And then moving on to some preliminary results from our surveys, we found that only 5% of participants reported using hydrophilic catheters. And of the participants who use in and out catheters, which was 23 people, 33% of those people reported that they reuse catheters. Of the people who reuse, 78% did so because of financial constraints, and 56% of people who reuse do so based on clinical guidance. And these reasons were echoed by interview participants who described reusing catheters as well. And lastly, nearly all of our survey respondents had at least one UTI post-discharge, which speaks to the widespread nature of this health concern in the SCI community. So now I will pass it over to Drs. Loyola Sanchez and Charbonneau, who will be reviewing the clinical evidence and guidelines about catheter use.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And yeah, so it was very, very interesting. And thank you for this very clear presentation of some of the results we're analyzing and understanding from people's experiences in Alberta. And because of that, we wanted to do a quick kind of review on two more things. One is, if we are seeing or we are hearing from people that the issue is is basically with the financial impact is related to the use of catheters and their cost and all of that, we wanted to bring some clinical perspective on what we know should be done right now, according to our best possible knowledge on what is the ideal status of managing the bladder with intermittent catheterization. Can you go for the next one? So what I'm gonna do is just quickly present in a few minutes what is the evidence or the knowledge that we have about the different types of bladder management in terms of in and outs. And then Dr. Charbonneau is going to talk about what are the actual recommendations from different groups of experts about what should be the best way to do in and outs. And then we can move on with the conversation on what should we have in Alberta. So I want to, so in terms of the evidence that we're providing, we identified two very recent systematic reviews. These are studies that kind of bring together a lot of studies and trials and try to see if they can answer to a question by getting all what is out there, right? So the first systematic review results I want to present is this one by Prieto. It's a Cochrane review. A Cochrane means that it's very well respected organization in order to do doing these types of evidence reviews. And the information is up to date until April 2021, so it's quite recent. Now, so what do we learn from this review? Well, first of all, the question about single use versus multiple. In this case, we're not talking about the material of the catheters. We're talking about what is best, to single use or to reuse, right? Is there a difference? So what they found is that according to all these studies that had been done comparing the different kind of behaviors here, they found that 6 fewer per 1,000 people will have symptomatic UTIs with single use in comparison with multiple use. So this 6 fewer is telling us, well, single use protects, or single use help to avoid symptomatic UTIs, which kinds of aligns with what the perception of the people who participated in the study was. However, the question is, how sure are we that this is the truth? And that's when things come a little bit complex. As you see on brackets, it says there is a wide range that goes like this. This range means that if we repeat these studies 1,000 times or 100 times, these are the results that we expect to happen. So you can go from finding a difference as large as 144 fewer events of UTI in comparison to reusing. But look at the other side. However, it can go to the other side of the spectrum to have a result that is telling us 237 more cases or more people with UTIs than people who are using multiple catheterization. So in other words, like the 6 fewer is our estimate. However, what is in the brackets is how much this could vary. And because this could vary from being like in support of single use, but it could go the other way, like against single use, that's what we call, we don't have a good precision of this estimate. Therefore, we have a low certainty because it's very imprecise. So that means that right now, what the evidence is telling us is that single use apparently is related with less UTIs. However, if more research is conducted in the future, this statement could change. We don't know if it could change to confirm that this is actually the truth or can go the other way around. So I hope this makes a little bit of sense. So I'm going to go to the next one. So what else this is telling us? So now if we compare, now let's compare by material of the catheter. If we compare hydrophilic versus uncoated, million-dollar question, what is best? So again, what they found is that 80 fewer people per 1,000 will have a symptomatic UTI with the hydrophilic coating versus the uncoated. However, look at the brackets again, the same thing that we did last time. It goes for, like, if we repeat the study, there is a chance that we can observe as few as 225 fewer cases, which is fantastic. We are really preventing. However, in the range, we go to the other side of the force here, right? Because now we're saying it could go to 100 UTIs more in the group of hydrophilic. So that's not good. And because of that, again, we have a low certainty on this statement. That means that if more studies are conducted in the future, our statement or our belief that hydrophilic catheter decreases symptomatic UTI could change. Now, it's not only about the outcome of UTI. What about other outcomes? Well, the other outcomes that were reported in these studies, it showed that 74 more people per 1,000 will have urethral trauma. They define this by having hematuria or blood in the urine, etc., with hydrophilic coating. And this doesn't make any sense to us. And look at the brackets, right? So it says 74 are going to have more trauma if they use the hydrophilic. And the bracket it ranges from 2 more people to 170 more people. So in this case, we don't have both sides of the force here. All of this is telling us that apparently with these studies, we're observing that using hydrophilic coating could be related to urethral trauma. And that's why you have a moderate certainty level of evidence here, right? It means that it's a little bit closer to the truth. However, further research could change this. And just keep this in the back of your heads, because this goes against everything that we have been hearing from people in the province and also from the beliefs of clinicians that, are we saying that hydrophilic are actually hurting more? Well, according to this study, yes, but keep that in mind, because I'm going to show you the results of the other study that is as good and as valid as this one, another review, and things had a different result there. And finally, in this study, I just wanted to mention that they look for preference, because that's one of the biggest things that we learn from our interviews, is that people are telling us hydrophilic catheters make the difference for me. They are really changing my life for the best, of course, right? And so we look at the preferences, and there was only, well, not we, but these people who did the review, and they found only one RCT in which, or one study in which 29 people is a very small study. The majority of these people reported to prefer the hydrophilic. So this is telling us it's not just in Alberta. So there is a kind of like other places in the world in which people with SCI are, or with neurogenic bladders, they are preferring the hydrophilic catheter. So these are the results from one of the reviews. Let's look at the second review. So the second review is by J et al. And this is very interesting because it has this thing that is you can read in here, is called the network meta-analysis. So the beauty of this one is that in the previous one, we compare kind of hydrophilic versus not hydrophilic, or use, multiple use or single use. In a network meta-analysis, you can use the different types of hydrophilic and the different types of non-hydrophilic. For example, you can have catheters that are hydrophilic but are not pre-lubricated or not pre-activated. And then you can have catheters that are uncoated but they're pre-lubricated. So that's the beauty of this type of approach, in which we can put head-to-head comparisons against different types of catheterization, because that's what we learn is this is not very simple. We have a lot of products in the market, and we needed to understand a little bit more. And maybe that's what we have all this mess up in our understanding what is better. So going to the results, what we found is that, look at this, this is very interesting. The best, so when they compared head-to-head all the different options, the best option that according to the numbers was the option that is single use, pre-lube, uncoated catheters. So these were not hydrophilic. There was just uncoated catheters, but they were pre-lube and they were used as single use. So, and they represent 70% less chance of having a UTI than using a single use uncoated. And this is good. They didn't compare with a multiple use, it's single use uncoated. And then you can see the precision is more or less precise. It's all on the same side, from 81% less to 1% less, but all of it is less. So lessons learned, single use, pre-lube, uncoated. However, they also found that for the use of single use, pre-lube, hydrophilic, they also found that they could be useful. But look at the brackets again. In this case, now we have the two sides of the force, right? From 81% less chance of getting a UTI to 230% more chance of having a UTI. So again, with this, my lesson learned is like, apparently single use, pre-lube, and uncoated what works, right? And this is moderate certainty. That means that it's close to the truth, but can change with RCTs. And finally, my last one. So can you switch it? Sorry. So this is my last one. Just the previous one. Yep. So what they also found in terms of preference, in this case, they were able to put together all about preference. They found that pre-activated, single-use, pre-lubricated hydrophilic catheters were 5 times more likely to be preferred, right? And in this case, we're on the same side. So it's from 14% less likely to 30,000 more likely. So it's still very imprecise. But so what this is telling us is that they found that maybe the hydrophilic is not what is related to the UTIs. However, people do prefer the hydrophilic for other reasons, right? And remember I told you about the hematuria or the trauma. So in this case, guess what? They found that with the use of hydrophilic catheters, that was the best one. Hydrophilic catheter was the best to decrease the risk of hematuria by 81%. However, it's still very imprecise. So you see, in the previous study, it tells us, oh, the hydrophilic is going to hurt them. It's going to create more hematuria. With this approach, it found that, no, apparently it protects, but there is not, but it's so imprecise that we don't know the truth. So my message to like in a nutshell, what is my message about going through this complex information is that the use of the one time versus multiple, definitely one time, single use. That I think we have a strong evidence, a strong information that tells us that this should go this way. And the second one, in terms of the material, apparently is more important the pre-lubrication status than the material. So at this moment, I could say having single use, pre-lubricated, and because of the preferences, apparently hydrophilic, that could be quite justified. Now, all of this that I'm telling you is just the information from different studies. But now the question is, what is the actual recommendation? Because it's not just enough to have this information. We need a group of experts to help us to understand all that is involved and help us with recommendations. So that's what Dr. Charbonneau is gonna talk about. So what is right now the recommendation in terms of the use of catheters in this population with neurogenic bladder? Rebecca?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I feel like I got maybe the easier review. So I just looked at the Canadian guidelines that were available. And I found 3 that were quite recent. So 2 were from the Canadian Urological Association and then 1 for nursing. And all of these reviews were recent and they're all very comprehensive. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the recommendation from the guideline specifically addressing catheter use. And just to take a step back, so when groups of clinicians and researchers get together to make a guideline, it's quite a rigorous process. So they have to, sit down, review all the evidence that's available, and then they have to give that evidence a grade. So that's sort of the first step. And then on top of that, they have to use their clinical experience. So as we know in medicine, often, there might not be evidence supporting something, even if it is the right thing to do. So I think I just want to put that out there first. And that's just because some of the studies haven't been done, or if they've been done, perhaps they weren't a large enough sample size, or the methodology wasn't a very strong way of doing it. So that's why when you make a guideline, not only is it based on the evidence and the strength, but also the clinical expertise. So if you look at this table, you can see kind of across the top, there's the section and the recommendation, and that last 2 columns are the strength of the statement according to the group that came up with the guidelines, and then also the quality of evidence. And this is evaluated using a standardized method as well. So as you can see in this table, a lot of the evidence talking about the type of catheterization is weak to moderate with respect to that catheter type and its relationship to urinary tract infections and urethral trauma. But it's, again, more in nature of the methodology of the studies or the sample size. So a couple of things from this table that I really wanted to highlight. So in the catheter-related complications, single-use catheters are recommended. So that's like bottom line, they do not recommend reusing catheters. And then hydrophilic catheters and pre-lubricated non-hydrophilic catheters may decrease the frequency of urinary tract infections. So unfortunately, there's not enough evidence to say that, well, definitely, but there's definitely trends showing that it may reduce that frequency. And then the next line about urethral trauma. So here it says hydrophilic catheters, again, may cause less urethral trauma. And we saw that as summarized by the evidence in the last couple of slides. And then from a patient perspective, hydrophilic catheters and pre-lubricated catheters are recommended as they improve bladder-related quality of life. And here the strength of the statement is strong and the quality of the evidence there is moderate. And then the last line I find is kind of interesting. So from an economic perspective, it's also recommended to offer patients hydrophilic catheters as they are cost effective compared to single-use PVC catheters because of both decreased urinary tract infections and increased quality of life. So this table, I think it does a nice job of kind of summarizing the evidence, and the paper is laid out, I thought, really nicely as well to kind of help support these arguments.
So now we will move on. Thank you so much, Dr. Charbonneau and Loyola Sanchez. And we'll now hear from 3 members of the Wheels of Change advocacy organization.
Thanks, Jocelyn. My name is Bean Gill, and I am part of Wheels of Change, as well as Tyler and Brittany are here with me as well. So Wheels of Change kind of started in 2020 when we were all doing Zoom calls weekly, and a bunch of us with spinal cord injuries found ourselves complaining about the same things over and over and over again. And so a bunch of us who are friends kind of decided, well, why don't we do something about this instead of just complaining about it? So there was originally 9 of us with spinal cord injuries who came together to form Wheels of Change. And then due to some people moving and different priorities in people's lives, we are now down to 6 people. But all of us do have spinal cord injuries at different levels. And combined, we have over 100 years of lived experience with spinal cord injuries. So we feel like we are the right people to be doing this, and we have a vast array of other people with spinal cord injuries within our reach, I guess. And we were able to register Wheels of Change as a nonprofit, and we are happy to be able to advocate, educate, and collaborate. Next slide, please. So Tyler, you're up here, buddy.
Well, hello, everyone. So I'm Tyler from Wheels of Change also, and I'm just going to talk about my experience with in and out catheters changing over to hydrophilic. So when I got released from the hospital, I struggled for the first few years with in and outs. I was getting urinary tract infections probably 6 to 8 times a year, and my quality of life was really the shits at that time. I'm a bigger guy in a power chair, so I would have to, when I got a UTI, I would have to set my chair back, put the catheter in, and try to be as clean as possible. It's a tough thing to do, and I was struggling when I'd have a UTI. My urethra would be blocked, and so I'd have to really push that catheter through, and I would struggle and struggle and struggle sometimes. And it got so bad at one time that when I was doing it, I actually drew blood, and it caused when I was at the Glenrose, I was at outpatient at the time, they said it was autonomic dysreflexia because of the trauma from the catheter. And the only reason it was happening is because I was jabbing this thing in, trying to get it through, even though I lubed it all up. You just never can get it really that well. So I struggled for the first few years with it, and it was UTI after UTI after UTI. Then Steve, who's also with Wheels of Change, was telling me about hydrophilic catheters. He's like, you got to try these things. And I'm like, okay, I'll try them. I tried them, and it was absolute game changer for me. I was able to cath wherever I wanted. It was less setup. It was so much easier to get in and out. I only get about maybe 1 UTI a year now. So it's completely changed my life with that. I can travel with them. I can do anything I want now. And it's all because switching from the in and out catheters and washing them, which I just thought that was a horrible idea. But once I switched to hydrophilic, yes, there's a lot of garbage involved because they fill up all the time, but it's changed my life. It's gave me that freedom back. And when you don't have to worry as much, well, I don't have to worry as much with the infections, it just seems like life's so much easier with it. So I recommend anyone I ever talk to, that's the first thing I say, get on hydrophilic catheters, because I waited too long after I got released from the hospital. It took me about 2 years to start using hydrophilics, but I will never, ever look back. It was the best decision I could have made. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm Brittany from Wheels of Change, and I am going to talk about the financial aspect of catheters and relation to quality of life. So I've been in a wheelchair for, I don't even, like 20 some years, so 22, 23 years. I start to lose count. But I was hurt when I was 13. So I've had the experience of using catheters for a really long time. And when I left the hospital, of course, the recommendation was just to wash catheters. So that's what I went home doing and didn't know any different. And because I was a teenager, I thought just never drink anything and I can go 13 hours and hang out with my friends and never pee. So that was my philosophy. And it worked for a little while, maybe like a year. I didn't seem to get too many infections. But, you know, a year or two down the road, it was just infection after infection after infection. And a lot of that had to do with me being a teenager, not wanting to drink. But as I moved into university, drinking just became a burden to me. And when I moved from my mom worrying about the catheters and washing and all of that stuff to myself having to worry about that, it just wasn't a huge priority to me. And so I tried buying them and I just wanted to be able to not have to wash them. So I started buying them, which was a financial burden when I was going to university. And most kids, you know, they ask their parents to help them pay for university. While I started struggling to pay for catheters. So I got student loans to pay for university, and my parents helped me pay for my medical supplies, which is something that, you know, none of my friends had to worry about. Nobody was asking their parents to pay $500,000 a month for medical supplies, but that's something that I had a choice I had to make between paying for, you know, university or paying for catheters. And I couldn't do both. So my parents helped me and I got student loans. And then once I was done university and my mom was like, well, I can't really be paying for your catheters for the rest of your life. You have to do something different. So I started washing catheters and drinking less again, because it was expensive and I had a baby and my husband wasn't making that much money. And again, my infections just started to come back all the time. And it was like 12 infections a year. It was crazy. And I couldn't afford to buy more catheters. And I knew I needed to drink more water to prevent infections. And so it became this huge burden to do the washing of the catheters correctly so that they were dry and no bacteria was in them when I was reusing them. And so I had this insane system for washing catheters that basically was like, it was crazy. I had drawers and I had days and days, like probably 2 weeks worth of drying of catheters so that they were completely dry. And it did improve my infections. But it was crazy how much time it took me to wash catheters. And if I went on holidays, it was not doable because I didn't have the space to dry all those catheters. It was embarrassing when I went to somebody else's house to wash all the catheters in their sink and explain that like I needed to do that. It was just a huge burden. And so finances in university, finances when I had like a young family. And then finally, when my husband got a job and I realized that he had coverage, which took me forever to realize that he had, paying for catheters forever. Then I was able to start using hydrophilic catheters, and the amazing, like, not to mention like financial change that made for us. Like I can now order $1,200 worth of catheters and not even think about it. But the ability to just drink as much as I want. And if I have an infection, I can literally flush and get rid of the infection without antibiotics in like a day and a half, because I can drink that much and I don't have to worry about the cost. Whereas before, if I had an infection, not only was I worrying about the infection, but I was worrying about the cost of the increased catheter use. So I just couldn't do what I needed to do health-wise to actually get rid of the infection or prevent it. And now I use probably 10, 15 catheters a day because I drink a lot of water, and it is so freeing to just be able to do what I know I need to do for my health and not worrying about the finances. But as I'm aging and my husband is nearing retirement, the financial thing is coming back again, because I know that I have to double the amount I put in retirement so that I can pay for catheters again when my husband no longer has coverage. So all of these things that people just don't think about with catheters and how much of a burden it is for people financially to think about, they're just things that I think a lot of people take for granted, and the government just doesn't understand how many people are out there going, how much do I have to put away from retirement? And that, an able-bodied person who can probably work longer than somebody with a spinal cord injury has to put away less than we do, because we know we have to save for retirement and catheters because there's no private coverage. So there's just been a whole bunch of times in my life where it's been a financial burden for me to be able to care for myself and be able to buy medical supplies. So that's my piece.
Thanks, Brittany. And I just wanted to point out too, like Brittany is working, so is her husband. And so they have this ability to, provide all these catheters, but there's so many people out there who are on AISH or on income support, and they don't have benefits, and they don't have these luxuries, quote unquote, to live with. And so that's why it's really important that we advocate so that everybody can get free catheter coverage in Alberta, because it is 2022 and there's no reason we shouldn't be. And so pee for free. This is a human rights issue, because we should be able to pee and poop for free. These are normal bodily functions that we no longer can do quite, quote unquote, normally, simply because of a spinal cord injury that usually wasn't our fault. And so this has prompted us to create the Pay to Pee campaign. Next slide, please. Oh, oops, sorry. That's the next, sorry, my bad. There we go. Brittany, you're up.
Okay. So the Pay to Pee campaign was an idea that I had to raise awareness in the larger sort of public about the issues of paying to pee, because a lot of people don't actually know. I've done presentations before where people can see, they can see our physical needs, and they can see that we need a ramp and all that stuff, but nobody sees that we have to pee with a catheter. And most people are like unaware that we even have to pay for a catheter, let alone that we have to pay for those catheters. And so I just thought it would be a great idea to be able to get people to record how many times a day they go to the bathroom and pledge a certain amount based on the types of catheters that they could potentially buy if they did have a spinal cord injury. So there's different pledge amounts, $2, $4, and $6 based on, like a uncoated, non-lubricated catheter, and then the next level up, and then eventually to the hydrophilic coated catheters, which are the most expensive. And if they have to pledge a certain amount for every time they pee, then they'll start to think like somebody who actually has to use catheters and pay for them, because they won't know how much they're actually pledging. And they're going to be like, oh, I don't know if I should pledge this dollar amount, because what if I have to pee a lot? And if I go out with my friends, am I going to have to pay more for this fundraiser that I signed up for? And I just thought it would be a really good idea for other people that don't have injuries to see what it's like for us every day and start to think like we do. We have a website for it. We're currently still trying to decide when to launch the Pay to Pee campaign. We were starting to collaborate with other organizations just to gain more traction and have a bigger voice behind the campaign. So we're still sort of in that, what's the word I'm looking for? In that spot. And then once we are ready to launch, the website's ready to go. I have it all ready for people to go on and sign up as a team or as an individual. And then they can pledge themselves for their however many times they pee, or they can have other people pledge for them too. So it's just like a run-a-thon, however many miles they run. They can pledge for the miles they run or the amount of times they pee, or they can have their family, friends, and other people that they know pledge for them too, which is going to just raise more awareness, because they're going to be like, I don't know how many times that person's going to pee. How much am I paying? I don't know. Well, that's what our life is like. And if you have to try and if you know you have a budget for the fundraiser, then you have to manage how many times you pee. And that's exactly what our life is like.
Thanks, Brittany. I think we could go back to the previous slide or the next slide. I can't remember which one. Yeah. So what are we doing to fix the problem? So we all know that there's a lot of issues out there, and So we really want to be solution focused and see like, what can we actually do to fix this? So what we did is we are connecting with policymakers. These are the people who make these decisions. These are the people who review the budgets and who allocate money to certain projects. So we have written an email that was approved by Dr. Charbonneau and Dr. Sanchez to the health minister, to the deputy minister of pharmaceutical and supplementary benefits division, to the NDP health critic, and to the mental health patient and mental health advocate, this email was to open the conversation and to really let these policymakers know that, hey, this is how we're living. This is a reality for a lot of us in Alberta in 2022. And it's not really, there's a lot of holes in our system and it's not effective at all. So we need to really look at this and overhaul it. We're also working with Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. They just came out with a 39-page report that they used with their own Ontario statistics to lobby their government to get free catheter coverage for all Ontario citizens who need them. And they were successful. And so they have said that they will help us do the same thing in Alberta, because like I said, it's 2022. Why are we still living in this old age where we're still having to pay for these things? And the biggest thing is, like Brittany said, so many people don't know. So many people just think that spinal cord injury is like, oh, you just can't walk. But we all know it's so much more than that. It's bowel function, it's bladder function, it's sexual function, it's pressure sores and, heart issues, lung issues, all of these things, not on top of all the mental health stuff that comes along with having a disability in this province. And so we really take it seriously to be able to raise awareness and to make sure that the able-bodied community also knows what we do to poo and pee, that it costs us money every time we have to use the bathroom. And by getting more awareness out there to the able-bodied community, we're going to have more support in lobbying the government to make these changes, and having researchers and clinicians back us as well. That's giving us a louder voice, giving us more clout in order to help the government make these changes, which is inevitably going to help thousands of people in Alberta currently, and help all of those people who are coming into having a spinal cord injury, because unfortunately people get injured all the time. And so our numbers are not going to start decreasing at any point. It's always going to keep increasing. And that's just spinal cord injury. We're not talking about spina bifida, cerebral palsy, and all of these other MS, all of these other conditions where those people also require catheters. We are very, very passionate about this because this is our lives, and it directly affects not only us, but all of our friends and so many of our peers that are living with spinal cord injuries. So that's all we have from Wheels of Change. And we'd be happy to talk more if anybody has any questions or concerns, or if you want to help us, we are happy to have you.
Thanks so much, Bean, and your Wheels of Change group. Thanks so much. Thanks to the doctors for sharing their insights. Thank you to Jocelyn as well. We have about 10 minutes, and just a quick reminder that this webinar is recorded and is going to be posted on Spinal Cord Injury Alberta's YouTube channel. Once we've finished up our discussion here today. I'm going to open the floor. We're open to any questions or discussion you may have relating to today's topic. The discussion session is going to be recorded as well, so please feel free to ask or share anything relevant, and please be respectful of other people's thoughts and perspectives during the discussion. And with that, I will open the floor. Does anybody have anything that they want to say? Any question that they'd like to ask? The floor is yours. Jeff, I see your hand is up. And I think you're on mute, Jeff.
There we go. Great presentation, by the way. I've had 2 failed bladder neck surgeries because of cathing so many times for, I guess it was 2001. I guess that's 21 years. Wow. And, I started with the regular everyday catheter, unlubed. and had to do it myself. And I go, 10 to 15 times a day. I drink a ton of water. And now I've since had to go to a suprapubic because of my urethra and bladder neck is totally shot. From, I learned how to self-cast on a VHS. That was my education. And, it's just wrong. The other thing I don't understand why Pharmacare in BC pays for urostomy supplies, which is for bladder, and not catheters. It just doesn't make sense in my mind. But I'm very passionate on this idea, and I thank everybody very much. Very well done.
Thanks, Jeff. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Marnie, I see your hand up there.
Hey, thanks for the topic, and it's interesting. One thing that drives me crazy is just the high cost of the catheters to begin with. Like, why a 6-inch plastic PVC thing costs like $1 minimum, kind of thing. So that might be something else to, fight down the road. But yeah, I hope you guys have success, and we can do the same thing in BC as well. So thank you for all the ideas.
Thanks, Marnie. Are there anybody else have anything, like any questions or comments they'd like to make?
Hey, if you guys wouldn't mind, I could give can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Steve.
I got this male model, if you guys can see this or not. And what it shows is essentially if you took a uncoated catheter and put lubrication on the catheter, and it gives an idea of what happens when the catheter goes into the urethra, the male urethra. And if you don't mind, I'll do this real quick, and it can kind of give you a visual. What I'll do, I also have this ink. All it is like a plain ink, and what it'll do, it'll show the lubrication on the catheter. So I'm just going to dip it in the ink real quick, just so you can see that it's lubricated. And what happens when you insert the catheter into the male urethra?
Can you put it more in front of your face or your chest, because it's hard to see with your screen? Yeah, there you go.
As the catheter goes into the urethra, you can see at the tip of the like the distal end of what would be the penis. You can see the catheter, all the lubrication coming out. And the reason it's clear is so that you can see within the catheter, within the urethra, there is no blue dye. So essentially, as the catheter is going through the urethra, the lubrication is coming off. And then as you pull it out, obviously, the end of the catheter, there's no dye on the catheter. So real quickly, I'll do the same thing with a hydrophilic. And this is really what shows the difference as to the lubrication just staying on the catheter. I'm touching the catheter for this example just because I want to make it quick. But I don't know if you can see now. You can see that the dye is still on the catheter as it enters and exits. So we're not losing the lubrication as we're entering into the urethra, where when we use a uncoated, what happens is you see a lot of the lubrication coming off of the catheter as it goes in through the urethra, which might be one of the reasons why we talked about earlier, just the micro tears and within the urethra that causes, like Jeff said, for his surgeries, right? So I thought that would be a nice example to see the difference between, visually see the difference between hydrophilic and uncoated using lubrication.
Thanks for that, Steve. That was really helpful.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have anything they want to add? Marnie?
One thing I just wanted to comment was, I know a lot of people, especially in the spinal cord injury community, or anybody that has a neurogenic bladder, they kind of like to paint the catheter companies in a negative light, saying like, why do catheters cost so much money? I, for one, though, am very grateful to these companies, because without them, there would be no catheter innovation. It's not doctors that are doing the research and the, you know, funding all of the amazing new developments. It's the companies that believe there's a market for the more healthy catheters, and that's who's developing the things that are making our lives more healthy and better long term. Our urethra is healthier, all that stuff. So I just wanted to point that out, because it's easy to say, oh, they don't need to charge that much, but I would rather the government start paying for our health, and the catheter companies keep doing research and development on what's going to be better for our health long term, than the cost of catheters going down and us sort of stagnating at you know, what is going to be a type of catheter forever. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thanks for that perspective. Yeah. And I just wanted to point out that Jeff in the chat put plus bladder medications that aren't covered. Jeff spends $4 a day. So thanks for that perspective. Thanks so much for the perspective on there. We have about 2 minutes left. Is there anyone else that would like to add to the conversation or have a question?
I just have a question, like, how do you know if your catheter is hydrophilic coated, and like, what is that exactly?
So a hydrophilic catheter is essentially a polymer of PVC plus silicone. And when those two things join, they actually attract water. So when they're put like in a saline solution, the water binds to the outside of the catheter and coats it completely and makes it like super slippery. So that's what a hydrophilic catheter is. And your catheter should say on it. If it just says, if it doesn't say, I don't know whether actually Steve might be able to answer that better than me. Steve, I don't know if you.
You'll see if it's a hydrophilic catheter, it's going to come in a different case, right? And you'd have to ask.
Yeah, but my catheter is hydrophilic. It doesn't say on it, but you'll know it's hydrophilic if it's like super slippery. I don't know how you know it's hydrophilic actually.
Jeff's holding up an example there for you all to see. Great.
Can't see. But can you just stop sharing the screen so we can see other people?
Oh yeah, that might help. Yeah.
Sure. Is that better?
Yes, but now Jeff, hold up your thing again and say something so you come up on full screen.
Okay, this is the hydrophilic, and there's water in it. You can, I think, I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
There is water in it.
Oh,
this is
wow.
This is an IQ one. That's the one I was using. It's an hourglass tip, and I really liked it.
Wow.
But now I don't use any anymore. But,
oh, neat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. I hope this has been a beneficial conversation for you. I know that I'm incredibly honored and grateful to our lived experience panel helping us understand the situation. Thank you for your vulnerability and for your honesty and openness. I think what I've come to learn is that there is a level of resilience and courage in you that I admire I admire deeply. So thank you for vulnerably sharing your experiences today. Thank you to the doctors, and thank you to Jocelyn for a really tremendous presentation. And with that, we are concluded. And just a quick reminder that you'll be able to watch this all over again on YouTube if you'd like to, or if you know someone who missed the presentation. It'll be up on Spinal Cord Injury Alberta's YouTube channel shortly. So with that, thanks again, everyone. And
Sean, just before you dismiss people, can you? I think this conversation is so important because we plan to continue working on this. There will be a post-webinar chat next
right.
Monday. So just to let people know that at the same time, right? I think the same time.
Same time, yeah, same time. And yeah, thanks for picking that up for me, Beto. I appreciate that. Yeah, if the conversation can continue next Monday at the same time, and hopefully you're able to join. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys, thanks.
Thanks.